Does it make any difference if I'm leaning forward or coming back or just whatever I want to do?
I'll keep you in the camera.
Okay.
She's good. If you could just give us a little bit of your background as to where you were born and grew up. And
I'm Armin Angelucci, and I'm 86 years old. Born August the 8th, 1920. Born, as a matter of fact, pretty close to where we're sitting here today, ladies. Right down here on Lexington Avenue. And I went to grade school at what they call St. Peter's Grammar School, which is up on Bar Street downtown. And then from there, I went to a place called Lexington Latin School, which was a combined 7th and 8th grade of grammar school right into high school. I went from the 6th grade of grammar school into 4 years of high school, so to speak. And that's what the Lexington Latin School was. It really was a school where I think the nice Catholic priests hoped that the young boys would become priests, but of course I wasn't good after being a priest. But anyway, I finished high school when I was 15, started at UK when I had turned 16 in August and started in September. Graduated from UK at age 19, which was way too young for me to know what in the world I wanted to do. So I told my Daddy, I need to go back to school to take some postgraduate courses because what am I going to do? Go join you downtown and sell neckties and suits and so forth, because he was in the clothing business. So that's what led me back to law school. I started in law school. After about 2 years of law school, the war came up, World War II, and I went into the service, and then came back after the service and finished up the remaining 2 years of law school in 1948 or 49, something like that. Now, to go on from there, when I left law school, graduated from law school, I was employed by the Attorney General in the state of Kentucky and went to Frankfort. Well, commuted every day in the Attorney General's office, and I was assigned to represent the State Highway Department in different matters such as eminent domain, condemnation suits, accidents that people might have on the highways from holes in the road or hitting a highway truck or a slide coming down from a mountainside in East Kentucky. Had that job for 7 years, and then ran for county attorney, Fayette County attorney, and was elected Fayette County attorney and stayed there for 12 years, elected 3 times. And then finally decided to give up the so-called politics and get into the practice of law. But about that time, Judge Nolan Carter, one of our circuit judges, died unexpectedly. And at that time, the judges were running on partisan tickets. On tickets, it was nonpartisan now, but then it was partisan. And the Democrat Party put me up. You really didn't have to run particularly. Put me up as a candidate for that vacancy on the court, even though there had been a replacement made by Governor Nunn to replace Judge Carter. But anyway, then I was elected circuit judge and stayed there for 18 years. And in 1988, my good friend Governor Wallace Wilkinson asked me if I would go down and be appointed as chairman of the State Workers' Compensation Board, which I did, and stayed there for 7 years and retired in March of '95. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, that's kind of where I came from. I started in Frankfort in my judicial career with 7 years and finished up in Frankfort with 7 years. So here I am today, retired and enjoying every bit of it.
Oh, that's amazing. You decided to go to law school because you had just gotten out of school early, or there was a real attraction
I really
to the law?
decided to go because when I finished college with a AB degree or BA degree, I was just 19 and I really hadn't made up my mind what I wanted to do, and really wasn't much to do with that kind of a degree. And so as I indicated earlier, I told my father that I needed to go to some more schooling and decided, well, I'll try to law school. So I hadn't had in mind to go to be a lawyer, but then I enjoyed it and found out that was the right profession to get into. So that's how I got into law school.
Well, When you were in law school, do you have any particular memories of any of your professors or classes? How large was your class?
Well, when I started in law school, surprisingly, I started in the summer term. I had graduated from college, say like in June or May. I forgot which. It's been so long ago. But then I started right in law school in the summer session. And I remember having classes with seniors at that time, and it scared the devil out of me because they were so much smarter than I were, and had had 2 or 3 years of law and up to that time. So I remember it being very tough, very difficult, and I studied a lot. I probably studied more then than I did later on in my time in law school. And I remember the outstanding professors that they had at that time. There was Dean Evans, and there was Roy Moreland, and Frank Murray, and a fellow called Pop Randall, and there was another professor named Pinky Roberts, but they were all nice older gentlemen and real smart, outstanding professors. I enjoyed every one of them. And then there was also Amos Edwin, who later retired from practicing law from teaching law, and then practiced downtown in a law firm. So those were good days at the law school. Like I say, it was interrupted because of the war, but those same professors were there after the war that I had seen before I went off to service. But I enjoyed law school. I thought it was difficult, and it was a nice experience.
Well, after you got out of law school, you said you started with in the county attorney's office?
No, after I got out of law school, I had a close friend by the name of Al Funk Jr. And at that time, his daddy, Al Funk Sr., was newly elected Attorney General of the state of Kentucky, and that's when Governor Earl Clements was also elected at that time. So through my relationship with Al Funk Jr., I took a job in the Attorney General's office from Al Funk Sr., the Attorney General, and stayed 7 years. He assigned me to work in the Highway Department. At that time, the Attorney General's office represented the different departments and agencies in the state, like the Revenue Cabinet and the Highway Department and the Finance Cabinet and so forth. So those were nice days. Traveled a lot in trying cases and learned a lot.
I'll bet. So after you traveled all around trying those cases, what brought you back to Lexington?
Well, I just felt like it was time for me to start practicing law. I had gone to law school to be a lawyer, and while I enjoyed that work in the Highway Department and tried a lot of cases and had the experience of trial practice, I still nevertheless thought that I want to go ahead and try it on my own and try to see if I could make some money. So I thought, well, I'll give up this job here in the Attorney General's office and practice back in Lexington. But in the meantime, having liked politics and got involved in politics, I thought I would run for an office when I began practicing in Lexington, and I ran for county attorney, and fortunately I was elected and was elected 2 more times after that. So I stayed 12 years in the county attorney's office as county attorney, and it really was almost full-time. I could practice law on the side and did a little, but not much because it was full-time. Back in those days, the county attorney represented the Planning and Zoning Commission, they represented the Airport Board, they represented the Health Department, the various agencies involved in county government, but nowadays they all have separate law firms representing them. So that was the reason for leaving the Attorney General's office. But then after 3 terms as Fayette County Attorney, I thought, well, my daddy never did like me, but getting involved in politics, so Daddy, okay, I'll start practicing law. Well, no sooner than I'd made the decision to retire from the county attorney's office, which I did, then Judge Carter died, and the Democrat Party, of which I happened to be in the head of at that time, I had to resign so that a committee in the Democrat Party could nominate or put somebody up to run against the incumbent judge at that time. Back in those days, Mary, the judges were elected by parties. It's nonpartisan now, as you know, but then it was Democrat running against Republicans and vice versa. So I ran as a Democrat against the incumbent circuit judge then, and fortunately won, and stayed there until I had 18 years of service as a circuit judge, and I had decided to retire anyway after 2 more years after being on the bench 20 years. But in the meantime, like I say, Governor Wallace Wilkinson asked if I would go down to Frankfurt and head up a newly created workers' compensation board in the Department of Labor. So I did that, and I enjoyed that. And stayed 7 years, and then thought, well, it's time to throw in the towel. So I quit and came home.
So during that course of time, you've seen a lot of changes, I would suspect, here, not only in Lexington, but in the whole legal community here.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any particular memories of the courtroom that you would want to share?
I do remember that when you tried jury cases, for example, in the voir dire examination of jurors, back in those, at that time, you would impanel a whole group of people, but you would sit 12 people in the jury box, and lawyers had the opportunity to voir dire those 12 people. And if they excused them for different reasons, either for cause or non-cause, and you had so many strikes of being able to excuse people from the panel, then you would put another 12 in the jury box and you would voir dire those. Now that system changed with the passage of the Judicial Act in 1976, and you voir dire the entire panel sitting in the courtroom, like 300 people or 200, however many you summons to begin with, and that's a difference. And I think for the most part, jurors have been advised by letters sent to them initially about the duties that's imposed on them and the things that they can expect. And back in those days, they probably weren't informed as much as they are today, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, how were judges selected when you were? Judges
were elected on the basis of party politics. Each party, would put up their own person. But I remember that, as a matter of fact, when I ran as a Democrat against the incumbent Republican, then after Judge Carter had passed away, then the then acting governor, Louis Nunn, appointed a judge. And so that judge did not have to run. He was appointed by the governor, which they did then. And of course, that same situation occurs now, and you run nonpartisan. Anybody can run, and you don't have to be presented by either party. Mm-hmm. So that's how they're elected, and that's a good system, I think.
Were trials conducted the same way as they are now?
Well, I believe so. Not having been down in the court system for the past 10 to 12 years, I think basically they're tried the same way. The same rules of procedure are followed. The voir dire examinations and the individual interrogation of jurors in death penalty cases, and of course the judge has the opportunity to ask questions also if either he or she wants to, but usually they don't. But I think basically the same procedures are followed today that were followed then. It's a question of just asking the juror if they can, listen to all the facts and make an unbiased decision and do something at the conclusion.
How did lawyers treat each other when you first started practicing? Has this changed over the years, do you think?
I think it has, Mary. Way back yonder when I started practicing, you could call a lawyer on the phone and tell them that you want to get a continuance in a case or something, and they'd have no objection to it and probably would not have to be involved by showing up at the motion hours, as we call it. And you could rely on that as being factual and being truthful. But I think as time came on, with perhaps so many lawyers now at the bar and with so many cases and so many different rules, I don't believe you can quite rely on that as much as you used to. The truthfulness and the integrity and the courtesy extended to you by other lawyers then was just first class, 100%. And I think as time went on, the fact that so many lawyers came and you didn't know who they were like you did 20, 30 years ago changed things to where you just never, now everything has to be in writing almost. Contract, put it in writing. So I think it's changed to that extent.
Who were some of the leading figures in the law?
Well, there were some just outstanding members of the bar back when I first started, and I recall when I officed in one of the buildings downtown, the Security Trust Building, there was Colonel Harbison, who was in the firm of Harbison, Kester, Lyle, and Bush, and in that firm was B.L. Kissinger's daddy, Mr. Kissinger, and Dick Bush, and Nathan Elliott. They were all outstanding lawyers and fine gentlemen and good citizens. Then there was, in the Stahl, Keenan, and Park firm then, which was called Stahl, Muir, Townsend, Park, and Money, you had Gail Money, you had Wallace Muir, you had Bill Townsend, and you had Rod Keenan. And then there was John Y. Brown Sr., who was practicing way back then and was a good lawyer. You had Harry Miller Sr., who was still practicing. Had Bill Guess. And there were just some outstanding lawyers. And also a very good lawyer whom I knew real well and enjoyed was Rufus Lyle. But I think there's good lawyers today.
Let's hope.
They were outstanding lawyers.
What types of cases do you remember? Any victories or defeats that are memorable or more memorable than others?
Well, not really. I used to say to lawyers, when you do, especially when you were a judge, if you ruled in certain cases and somebody so-called won, they really didn't feel like they won, because if they came out on top in the case, they felt like they should have won more than what you gave them. So you never feel like anybody won or lost. But I don't really remember anybody sort of winning or losing in cases.
What type of practice did you have when you were practicing law?
Well, really, I didn't, I guess mainly when I was county attorney and had the opportunity to practice on the side, I probably took divorce cases and automobile accident cases and wrote some wills and did that sort of practice that really didn't get me involved in too much research and too much lengthy trials, because of the fact that I was county attorney and I had to devote most of my time to the county business. But they were mainly divorce cases and traffic accident cases.
What was the work environment like? Were the hours that attorneys put in, were they lengthy like they are now? Well, it sounds like you had a pretty full plate.
Yeah, from what I hear now, with all these law firms and the expense of traveling and all this new technology with all the different machines and that you have to have in the practice of law, like fax machines and copy machines and shredders and that sort of thing, these lawyers have to put in so many billable hours to be able to help pay the bills with the firm. And back in those days, it wasn't quite that involved. But I think lawyers put in as much time researching and studying and being prepared for cases as they do now. I know that when I first became judge, I was impressed by the fact that so many lawyers, when they come to court, were just completely prepared with their trial work, their briefs, and their memorandum, and you could see that they had done a lot of work. And I think they practiced and prepared as long in preparation of their cases then as they probably do now.
Do you have an outstanding episode that you remember, maybe from your very early years when you were first out of law school? Is there anything that stands out in your memory about those early years?
Yeah, let me see. I might have. No, I think not. I really don't remember anything being. I think the fact that when I first became judge, I remember more about being a judge than I do county attorney, because of course that's the latter part of my professional career. But I know I was scared to death when I became judge, because I hadn't really been prepared to be a judge. Never thought about being a judge. Didn't want to be a judge until sort of accidentally came upon me when Judge Carter died and the Democrat Party had to put somebody up to run against the judge then incumbent. And so I remember when I first was elected that it scared me to death to have these smart, outstanding lawyers come in and present cases, and I thought, well, mercy, both sides seem real good. I don't know what I'm going to do to reach a decision, but that sort of stayed with me for years and years, and I recall staying in that courthouse at night times and on weekends and studying and reading, something that I hadn't done before. so that's what I really remember a whole lot of, that I thought was awful tough.
Sort of learning by being put on the spot there.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, then you probably saw a lot of changes that occurred during that time that you were on the bench. There were changes in the law and maybe some changes in Kentucky.
Well, of course, with the change, with the judicial article passing in 1976, that I think went a long way in improving the court system. At that time, even county judges could be a postman or a shoe clerk or anybody in the county. That you didn't have to be a lawyer. With the passing of the judicial article, then the judge then was, they now call them judge executive. They have to be lawyers, which is a good thing. And I think that was a big improvement. And at the same time, they created, with that passage of that act, it created the judicial system in Kentucky. They used to have the old police courts and quarterly courts, but now you have, with the passage of that act, you have the sort of 4 tiers or 4 level of court system. You've got the district court, then you've got the circuit court, and you have the Court of Appeals, and you have the Supreme Court. So I think that it was much improved over the old system where you just had the lower court level, quarterly courts, police courts, and then the Court of Appeals. So that's been a big improvement, and I think the fact that they required county judges or now judge executives to be lawyers is also a vast improvement, because you should know something about the law if you've got that responsibility in the county. So that's been the biggest and best change. And then they have, with the changing of that voir dire system in the juries with those jurors, I think that's big improvement. Saves a lot of time, saves a lot of unnecessary movement in the courtrooms. So that's been a big improvement.
That makes a big difference. Were there any public events when you were practicing or when you were on the bench that had any impact on the law besides the big changes?
Well, I'll tell you something funny, Mary. I used to be involved a lot in politics, naturally, because then when I ran for county attorney and judge, you had to be in politics. But I remember during one of the presidential races when Adlai Stevenson ran against Dwight D. Eisenhower, President of the United States. Adlai Stevenson came to Lexington for a speech. And he was going to speak on the courthouse steps there on Main Street. And at that time, I happened to be head of the Democrat Party or something. And the particular day that he spoke, it was raining. So he was out there speaking and on the steps of the courthouse, and we had a sparse crowd out there because of the rain, but I was holding an umbrella for dear old Adlai Stevenson, and I tell you what, I got wet as the devil and he was stayed dry, so no, I stopped all that business. No more umbrellas for me holding for any candidates for President of the United States. But anyway, that was a wet day for me and a dry day for him, and on top of that he lost. So I do remember that. And then I remember also, while I was judge, I remember on my honeymoon I was in Tampa, Florida, and John Kennedy was running for president, and he was going to appear in Tampa, Florida, down there one particular day. So my wife and I got involved in the crowd to go see and listen to Jack Kennedy, because he had really been in Lexington 2 or 3 days before that, and we missed him here because we were on honeymoon. And so he came down through this big crowd there in Tampa, and my wife, we were standing in line with all that crowd. So when he came by and grabbing people's hands and so forth, my wife grabbed a hold of his hand and never would let him go. He had to say, "Let me go, lady." I do remember that. So those are some kind of strange experiences to talk about the judicial system.
That's funny. Do you have any recollection of how attorneys were disciplined when you first started practicing law? Has that changed?
They were, I think now that they've got some sort of a committee that reviews the complaints against the lawyers misbehaving. Back in those days, you referred it, I think, the whole thing was referred to the Court of Appeals, and I think they did the investigating. But now I think it comes up through a committee, and it's much more involved, and I think probably a whole lot better to give the person who's been charged with violating the ethics laws or what have you, gives them a better chance of presenting their side of it. It makes it a little more thorough and probably a fairer indication. I remember another thing that was strange and happened to me. When we were trying a case, it was late. I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. Finally, when the case went to the jury, and one of the jurors had a heart attack back in the jury room, and of course they came running to me to let me know about it. So I went in the jury room, and the poor fellow was stretched out on the floor, and it turned blue, and really was a serious situation. So we called the emergency people, and they got there, and of course took him to the hospital, and he had left word where he lived so that we would try to notify his wife or his family. But in the meantime, that particular case, we had alternate jurors sitting during the course of the trial, and when the evidence and everything was complete and the jury retired, we of course dismissed the alternate jurors, and this one alternate juror had remained in the courthouse building, was not in the courtroom because I had dismissed her. She was down in the sheriff's office in the courthouse getting a late bite. We had ordered some chicken or something for the jurors, so she stayed in the courthouse to get a meal. So when this poor fellow had this heart attack, and we had to keep the jurors separated in another room, and we worked on this poor guy, and the emergency people got there and worked on him and finally took him to the hospital. I summoned the other juror, the alternate juror, who had not been talking to the jurors or had not been talking to anybody about the case. I let her sit on the jury for the rest of that deliberation. And of course, one of the lawyers for the particular defendant, it was a criminal case, one of the lawyers had objected to my doing that. But nevertheless, I did, and the jury returned a verdict. I think it was 5 years they gave this particular defendant. I don't really remember the charge. I remember the case. And so they took an appeal of what I had done on the basis of the fact that this juror hadn't gotten the knowledge of the other persons and all that business. And the case was reversed, and we had to try it again. But that was an unusual thing. And on top of that, I remember the rest of that morning, I, along with some other court personnel, went looking for this juror's wife after we'd got the verdict in to notify her, and she had moved. So we had an awful time trying to locate her, tell her about her poor husband had a heart attack. Then another time, Mary, I remember a right interesting and comical thing that happened when we were selected, when we were getting ready to try a case. This one lawyer was standing in front of these 12 jurors on their voir dire examination and asking them questions, and he asked these jurors if they had any reason why they couldn't sit or had any reason to know why they wouldn't be a fair and impartial juror. And this one lady held her hand up in front of this lawyer and said, "Yeah, I can't sit in this trial." And he said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, because I don't like you." Of course, that kind of made everybody hush and quiet in the courtroom, and I didn't know what to expect or what that lawyer would say next. And he said, "Does any other people on this jury feel the same way about that?" And all 11 of them held up their hands. I never will forget that. Of course, I won't mention the lawyer's name, but it stuck in my mind over the years.
Oh, gosh. Well, Do you have any particular memories of the Fayette County Bar Association? Well, you were probably off doing a million other things, but
No, not really. I don't think the Bar Association was as active in what they did then as they do now. From reading all the bar journals and all the reports and the news that comes from the bar these days, they're very active in the pro bono program and different events that they do for citizens and charitable work and so forth. And I don't think they did as much then as they do now. However, the lawyers just routinely did the pro bono work, but it was done on the basis if somebody came into your office and needed a divorce or needed some legal assistance, the lawyer just went on and did it. They wasn't a question of going to the president of the bar and saying refer this to the pro bono committee and see if you can get somebody to do it. They just went on and did it as routinely, not expected to be paid and knowing that they wouldn't be paid. But I think it's gotten so big now with just, population being so great and so many people and so many problems that people are looking for legal help. And so I think the pro bono, from what I hear, is a real nice program now and very active with the lawyers at the bar. So that's a good thing.
Do you have any advice that you might give to a young lawyer starting out now?
Well, I would say just be truthful and be courteous and be prepared. Do your homework. Always go to court prepared, and be respectful of the court system because it is a good system. And I remember another funny thing, Mary, while we're talking about it. We used to have motion hours, which you all are familiar with, and it would be like every Friday morning. And I recall one Friday morning when my courtroom was just full. It was just had a lot of lawyers and a lot of people there who might be involved in the cases to be heard that day. And I usually called the docket myself. And when I'd call the docket, I'd get responses from the lawyers out in the courtroom, either saying, that's to be heard, judge, or I need a trial date, or pass that, or written orders, things of that, and I wouldn't look up much to see who was answering because I had a big docket to call. So I remember one occasion I called this case and somebody in the back of the courtroom stood up and made an answer to it, and I told that person back there, I said, look, next time you come to court you have on a tie and coat in my courtroom. So, and it was a long-haired person, and I thought it was probably one of those hippies or something back in those days. And that person, after that, respectfully went on out the courtroom, the back door. I had two doors to my courtroom, and this was the back door. So after that person went out that door, some of my court personnel right there, the clerk or the reporter, somebody said, Judge, that's a woman. And I said, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. I said, look at that long hair and had that open collar and so forth. I thought it was a man without a shirt and tie. So they laughed about that, and I was embarrassed about that. But then I used to always tell people, well, next time that person came to court, she had on a coat and tie. But anyway, I blew that one because it was a long-haired, nice girl, and she had the right to come in there without a coat and tie on. But I wasn't looking back in there that day, and I thought it was some fellow with a long hair and no tie and coat in my court, and I wanted somebody to be properly dressed. I think there's a difference in dress today, too, as compared to back in those days. It even reminds me of dress in college. It's quite different these days than years ago.
What, in your opinion, are the biggest challenges facing the legal profession today? Are they similar to what you think were being faced when you first started practicing?
Well, I'd say that there's probably more attacks on the Constitution today than there were then. It just seems like now, with all these different organizations who are opposed to policies and theories and so forth, they just seem to attack the Constitution now more than they did then. And I think it's a good thing because you have a right to do that. You have a right to require free speech and follow the different sections and provisions in the Constitution, and if they're being violated, then somebody ought to object to them. But I think there's a whole lot more lawsuits today attacking the Constitution than there were years ago. And I think that's due to the fact there just seem to be more people, and there's more people in the legal system. But it's still the best system in the world. It's good. It's good. It's a good profession. I'm glad I got into it.
Well, I think that pretty much covers all the questions that we had. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or any other stories you'd like to share?
I don't think so, Mary. I think that's about as good as about as bad as I can do.
Well, that was really good. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Those are good stories.